What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Jenks Hammer podcast. I'm your host, Grayson Jenkins, back again with friend of the podcast, Ty McGee. He's been here the last few weeks, and week 4 came and gone, and it was another hectic week in the NFL. A few games that were a little bit surprising, and a few teams staying strong. And we're getting right into our week 5 picks, and we'll review a little bit of week 4 beforehand. And before we get into our picks, as usual, I want to review our top pick'em group leaders. So Picking Grapes remains on top, 39-24. Unjuicy J is at 38-26, and Ty is now all the way up in third, going at 37-25.
Big week.
He somehow just destroyed everyone this week. So props to you, Ty. I'll give you a little golf clap, but I'm way down here at 14th. But technically, I think I should be tied with 10th because I picked the Eagles if Devontae Smith was out, and I forgot to switch that. So 33-31. It's not a great look either way. But I feel like a lot of people are just. This is a tough year for picks. I mean, like this is probably the worst. I mean, last year I think I had a lot better record, but everyone's all over the place. No team has solidified themselves, and that's kind of September football. That's just the way it goes sometimes because teams aren't all the way together. Injuries have been a big deal this year, so we'll see how it turns around in October this month. So getting right into week 5, Thursday night football. Ty, what you got for us for the Bucs and the Falcons?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good one. I think we've seen these two teams, like, Tampa had a really hot start, and they kind of had that week against Denver that just seemed like a bit of a fluke, and then they came back out hot again last week. And the Falcons just have, like, since that week 1 when we really thought Kirk Cousins was immobile, they've really come out and, like, surprised us, like, playing in a close game against the Chiefs 2 weeks ago. I just think, like, this team is going to continue to grow, and with a lot of guys that, like, you wouldn't expect to make contributions, right? Like Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod is, like, their third option above Kyle Pitts right now, which is kind of shocking, but he's just kind of earned the trust of Kirk Cousins and Zach Robinson. So I think this is going to be a really good game, and it's obviously a divisional matchup. Anytime in the NFC South, besides maybe Carolina right now, but who knows? We'll talk about that. But it's like they're always really competitive games. I mean, you saw Falcons Saints last week, right? Like Falcons kind of hung on there at the end, but I think that's like the true teller, right? Like the Falcons, like were only able, I know the Saints are a good football team, right? But they were only able to win that game at the end there. They've been in a lot of close ball games, whereas Tampa has, like, shown the ability to blow teams out. Obviously, again, minus the Denver game. I think that game was a little different, right? Because they were without Vita Vea, without Luke Gadecki. Like, I just think that they just hit a stopgap there with some injuries, and then were able to bounce back. So I think Tampa coming in here, I think that they're rolling. They're too good of a football team. Baker's kind of back at it. Last week we saw Bucky Irving and Rachaad White with, like, equal, production on the ground. So I just think the offense that Tampa has right now is too good of a team for Atlanta right now. So I'm going to go with the Bucs.
Yeah, I have to agree with you here. I think I'm going to the Bucs as well. I think the Bucs offense is just rolling on all cylinders. The running game looks good. The passing game looks good. And I think Baker Mayfield's second in passing touchdowns. So no one was expecting that going into the season. They thought he was going to be like average. The Bucs are going to get by, but they're excelling. So no one really expected too much for them. They're doing it. The Falcons, on the other hand, I mean, they didn't score an offensive touchdown last week and beat the Saints with 26 points. So, I mean, they did something right to win the game. Now, 2 touchdowns were kind of handed to them, so I'm not going to, like, say anything crazy about it. But like you said, they're able to stay in these games, these close games. And obviously, it was very unlucky loss to the Chiefs and then a lucky win to the Eagles. So I think they've kind of been all over the place, but I think the Bucs win this one. I'll have to agree with you here. Next, we get into Sunday games. The early morning London game, first of the season, with the Jets taking on the Vikings. And this is an interesting game because the Jets, obviously, they heated up a little bit when they beat the Patriots. Everyone's like, oh, prime Aaron Rodgers is back. Garrett Wilson was starting to get a little bit more involved. And then they go into Denver. They go against Denver in New Jersey. And the Denver defense just shut him down. I believe Garrett Wilson got held to 22 yards by Pat Surtain. He's been locking everyone down this year. So So yeah, the seatbelt is coming out. So I'm not gonna hate on the Jets for that one because the Denver defense has been doing really well. I think you picked them up in fantasy. I want to say it was your team in our league, whatever.
Yep.
I tried to put in a claim, it failed because you guys, whatever. But the Vikings, on the other hand, their defense is also balling out. I mean, they shut out the Packers until I believe they scored like 3 right before the half. So it was 35-3, whatever, at halftime. Not a good look for the Packers, but they had 2 picks, and their defense is just running all over the field. With Brian Flores is running very confusing schemes for offenses to read. And I think the Vikings offense, on the other hand, is just they're excelling like the Bucks. I mean, these are the 2 teams that everyone was like, okay, they'll be mid offenses, but they're doing extremely well. Sam Darnold is leading the league in passing touchdowns. Aaron Jones is balling out, and Justin Jefferson hasn't lost a step at all. So I think the Vikings come out and beat the Jets. I just don't think this is a very tough matchup for them. I think the Jets, yes, they have a good offense, but their defense right now isn't very great. So I'm going to go the Vikings.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you here. I think it's just like it's hard to judge the Jets last
Mhm.
week's game was like kind of literally a wash, right? Like we had that
Yeah.
hurricane and all the rain, so it's like tough to judge, right? But they did go, Aaron Rodgers, he was able to throw the ball and grip the ball in the rain, whereas like I think
Mhm.
like watching it from the Denver perspective, like Bo wasn't able to. So I think for the Jets, it was a bit of an easier day on the offense, right? But I don't still right, like you mentioned, Denver was able to stop them, and I think this Vikings defense is like on par with Denver or a little bit better, right? Like I think like they're both kind of in that top 5 defense right now conversation. But I just think the way that Brian Flores is confusing offenses,
Yeah.
uh, is next level. I think that the difference is Denver shows you what you're going to get, right? And Rodgers was able to call that out sometimes and make some plays that would capitalize off the blitzes that we were sending. I don't know how much he'll be able to do that this week,
Mhm.
especially with a bum knee, right? Like his knee is swollen, it's all messed up. He kind of got hurt in that last game. So I think like all these pressures, if he's not going to be able to read it as well, right? And then he's not going to be able to escape, that's going to be a big deal. And we'll just have to see how this run game bounces back, right? Because we
Yeah.
thought, it's a rain game, the run game should dominate. Brees Hall did nothing. Kind of screwed me in fantasy, honestly. Barely won because of him. And I just think the Vikings offense, like you said, Sam Darnold's playing really, really well right now. I know the Jets defense is pretty good, but I don't think it's as good as we thought it was going to be coming into the season.
Yeah.
This Vikings team is just rolling. Like I know they kind of let up late against Green Bay, but Green Bay's not a bad football team. So I'm going to go with the Vikings here just because they're playing so hot.
Yeah, and then the Jets offense, I forgot to mention this. They also had multiple false starts, like a lot of false starts last week. So just like, are they on the same page? What's going on over there? There's just a lot of questions with this team, and maybe they can answer some of them going into London against the Vikings. Next, we got the Panthers taking on the Bears. What are your thoughts on this one, Ty?
Yeah, so this is going to be interesting, right? Because the Bears kind of got it rolling last week at the run game. The Rams football team is a good football team, right? But especially with Braden Fisk and Jared Verse, they have some good guys over there on defense. Surprisingly, with all these injuries, they've been competing and playing well in a lot of games. But Chicago goes in there. They really were able to finally establish DeAndre Swift. I think he had 95 rushing yards and a touchdown on like 18 carries.
Mhm.
So that was really promising because that's something that we've been waiting for, right? To see the run game get established and help Caleb Williams a lot. Caleb didn't really have to do that much. I think he had 135 passing yards.
They have a lot.
He didn't really have to do much, but that's fine, right? Sometimes as a rookie quarterback, you want to rely on your run game. But the real part of this game and where Chicago, I think where they win this game is that defense, right? They're allowing only 165 passing yards, I think, right now per game. And that is the real strength of Carolina's
Mhm.
offense is the passing game. Andy Dalton really was slinging around to Xavier Legette and Deontay Johnson last week. I know they had a decent, Chuba Hubbard was able to run the ball pretty well, but think about who they were playing, right? Cincy's defense is not that good.
Yeah.
Cincy letting up 21 to these guys. I mean, I just don't think that's going to happen with Chicago, right? I think Chicago's defense is a lot better. And, kind of back to the Swift thing too, right? Like the Carolina Panthers defense is even worse than Cincinnati's was last week, right? Like letting up 31 points. Chase Brown and Zach Moss, had pretty much equal production. It was a lot of production. We saw Chase Brown with 2 touchdowns too. So I think, as I mentioned week after week, like losing Derek Brown is really going to hurt this team in the run game. And then they're not that great on the back end. So I just think, if the Chicago Bears can establish DeAndre Swift like they were able to last week, which they should be able to do with ease with how bad, the Carolina run defense is.
Mhm.
And if, they just play the way that they've been playing on defense, it's going to be a hard day for Andy Dalton. So I'm going to go with Chicago here.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I mean, you've touched on everything. I think their defense is just they're lights. They're playing pretty much lights out, and against a poorer team in the Panthers. I mean, they played the Rams last week with Matt Stafford, who's a good quarterback. He just showed that against the 49ers 2 weeks ago, and they still did pretty well. And then the Panthers come in with a little bit less of an offense, so I'm going to go the Bears as well. Next, we got the Ravens taking on the Bengals. The Ravens, they finally started handing the ball off to Derrick Henry like they should have been this whole year. They also did it against the Cowboys, but that was kind of like everyone's scheming against the Cowboys to run. That's what you go in doing. So they figured out they could do it. And then they go against the Bills, who I previously thought was the best team in the league. I think you did as well. And they just absolutely ran the ball down their throats. Derrick Henry, 200, almost, it was like 199 yards, 2 touchdowns. And they didn't really have to use the Lamar Jackson's arm at all. I mean, they talked about it. Lamar Jackson tweeted about it. He was like, I don't really care about any of you guys having like my parlay for passing yards. He didn't give a shit. He just let it out on Twitter. But their offense is humming as a running team like it should have been all year. We talked about that dual threat with Lamar and Derrick Henry. And on the other side of the ball, the Bengals, obviously, yes, they beat the Panthers, but it's the Panthers. It's not really that big of a credit to them. And they did let up 21 points, like you said. It's not a great. The Panthers are a better offense with Andy Dalton. I will say that, but they're still not a great offense in this league. The Ravens are a great offense, and I think they're going to tear this Bengals defense apart. I think that's what's going to happen. Even though it's in Cincinnati, I don't think the home field advantage means much. So I'm going to go the Ravens here.
Yeah, these interdivision games, right, in the AFC North, like they were always surprisingly
Mhm.
close, no matter how bad the teams are. Like right, like Cleveland used to be competitive even when they were bad. So I think this will at least be a solid ball game, especially because since he was able to, get T Higgins more involved last week, so much so that like Andre Isovas kind of took a step back, and Jamar Chase was kind of rolling. So I think this offense is really starting to get a hold of itself. With the run game, even right. I mentioned Chase Brown, Zach
Mhm.
Moss had a really good game last week. But you look on the other side who they're playing. There's a really good Baltimore defense that was absolutely clamped Buffalo last week, right? Like, James Cook didn't have the best of day. Josh Allen didn't have the best of day, right? Like, they really were able to hold them, and corral them. And like you said, right, that was the team that we thought it was the best team
Mhm.
in football, and they still might be, right? But Baltimore, they just showed up that day, right? And I think that's going to be the tough part because at the end of the day, the Cincinnati defense is not good. So if the Baltimore defense can at least keep Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T Higgins somewhat in check, right? Like keep them to 20 points. Derrick Henry right now, I mean, if you look at a lot of these fantasy football forums, he's the number one running back for week 5, just simply because he's going against a really bad
Mhm.
run defense. And he has dominated the last 2 weeks. So I think that's the formula. I think that's what they go back to. And I think that's what wins them this game. So I'm going Baltimore.
Yeah, I gotta agree on all counts here for this one. And then next we got probably the game of the week this week. I would say the Bills taking on the Texans is kind of a test to see if the Bills can bounce back. What are your thoughts on this one, Ty?
Yeah, this is tough, right? Because, obviously what we saw from Buffalo last week was not promising and almost kind of scary. And, we've seen Houston play in a lot of really close games. CJ Stroud kind of, got his swagger back a little bit last week, played a little bit better. I think, like you said, this is game of the week, and it's interesting with Steph, coming back playing Buffalo. But I do still think that Buffalo is the best team in at least the AFC, right? Like I just think they didn't show up to play against Baltimore. I think it was a tough one. But we have seen what they were able to put together those first 3 weeks, and it was astounding. I think some of the wins don't look as good anymore. Like we were high on Arizona, but then
Mhm.
Arizona has kind of faltered. But still, again, not a bad football team. I think they're able to climb back here and kind of bounce back and show some dominance. I think it's like this is that bounce back week for them, right? We saw Detroit do that, and now they're rolling, right? So I think like it's going to be tough because Houston's defense is pretty good, probably top 10, top 15, and their offense just has a lot of stars. But the big problem here is Houston might be again without Joe Mixon and Damian Pierce. So if they can't get the run game going, that's going to be the big part for them, right? Because then it just
Yeah.
becomes more predictable in the passing game. And Buffalo's secondary is not bad. Shout out to Damar Hamlin, right, getting a pick and stuff like that. So I just think at the end of the day, Buffalo is still the best team in the AFC, and the Houston's in the AFC. So with that, I'm going to go Buffalo.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you here. I just think the Bills obviously they came in to that game against the Ravens, and I don't think they were expecting them to use Derrick Henry as much as they did because obviously Zay Flowers was getting the ball a good amount in the prior weeks. They didn't really focus on the passing game at all. They weren't throwing the tight ends. I think Andrews had like a one pass to him, and it was dropped, and then whatever happened. But Derrick Henry had that one really long rushing touchdown, and then they never stopped handing him the ball. And I just don't think the Bills are prepared or ready for it. I don't know if their game plan or what was off. I just think it was all over the place for them. But the Texans, on the other hand, they haven't had a huge victory yet this season. And I think that's kind of what I expected from them was to have a big win by this point in the season. And last week they came out and they started off really slow against the Jaguars and had to take a pretty late touchdown drive in that game to take the lead over the Jaguars. And it also took Trevor Lawrence missing wide open touchdowns. So I just wasn't really impressed with that win. I'm going to go with the Bills here as well. Next, we got the Colts taking on the Jaguars, an AFC South battle, if you want to call it that. Two teams that aren't the best in the league right now. I mean, the Colts with Joe Flacco, they look a little bit better. I think Anthony Richardson did look solid in his drive and a half, whatever he played in last week until he got hurt. So if Joe Flacco plays this game, I think the Colts offense will look pretty solid. If Anthony Richardson plays this game, I think they'd look solid as well. It's just kind of who they want to choose if Anthony Richardson is healthy. And on the other side, Jaguars 0-4. They're trying to figure out their team culture. Is Doug Peterson on the hot seat? What's going on with that? I just think the Jaguars are under a lot of like scrutiny. Brian Thomas Jr. looks amazing though. I mean, he's on pace for I think he's on pace for like 1,100 yards, something like that as a rookie. So he obviously looks solid, but I just think the Colts, they got Jonathan Taylor. I think they're passing. The receivers are coming back. I mean, Josh Downs just came back and had 22 points on fantasy, 22 points in fantasy. And Michael Pittman Jr. is obviously still there as well. So I'm going to go to the Colts in this one.
Yeah, I think this game is really dependent on if we see Joe Flacco or Anthony Richardson. I think if we get Joe Flacco, I think the Colts are going to be able to dominate because they'll be able to throw the ball. You know, Josh Downs had a big week last week. Michael Pittman had a big week. So these, they have weapons. It's just can the quarterback get them the ball? And Flacco's shown the ability to do so. But I think if Anthony Richardson's in, the big thing that's going to hurt them is the fact that Jonathan Taylor is probably not going to play with that ankle injury, and they're going to have to go with Trey Sermon, who, when he had to step up for Jonathan Taylor last week, he was kind of, widely inefficient and ineffective. And Anthony Richardson, you're going to be able to cue in on him running the ball, right? Like if he doesn't have that yin and yang with another running back who they can kind of, use him to sway everything away from AR, and then AR can use his legs. So I think that's the big problem, right? Is do we see Anthony Richardson? Do we see Joe Flacco? I think if we see Joe Flacco, like I said, this is an easy win. If we see Anthony Richardson, I think Jacksonville, although they're 0-4, at some point they got to get a win, I think. And they played Houston well enough. Like they haven't, besides Buffalo, they haven't played a game terribly, right? Like the Browns were close. The Dolphins, when they had Tua, was close. Like these games were at least close enough. I think they have the weapons. Trevor's got to figure it out. Evan Ingram might come back this week. Maybe ETN, if him being hurt a little bit last week, right? He was banged up in the first half. But Tank Bigsby, played well. I just think it's so dependent. This is really a coin toss of who do you get at quarterback, right? So if it's Flacco, it's the Colts. If it's AR, I'm going to go with the Jags.
Yeah, I got to ask you, Ty, because this is a conversation, and I forgot who it was talked about it, but someone mentioned if the Colts have Joe Flacco and Anthony Richardson both healthy at one time, do they start one quarterback one quarter and the other one the second quarter, or do they go mixed quarterback starters? Do they start Joe Flacco over Anthony Richardson? What do you think is the best route for the Colts to go once both quarterbacks are healthy?
Yeah, it just really depends on what the Colts organization wants, right? Like, and at the end of the day, it's like you want to win football games, but there are, differing opinions and sways and all this, right? Like some people are so set on keeping Anthony Richardson, but I think to answer the question of if you want to win football games, right? Joe Flacco's the one you had to put out there because you saw the production that he was able to put up last week, the play that he had in Cleveland last year, right? Like he elevated Cleveland last year to becoming a playoff team, and he elevated the Colts offense last week without Jonathan Taylor for some of that game to be a really, really good offense, right? Like Josh Downs and Michael Pittman looked really good. So I think especially here's the big thing, right? Like Flacco is so experienced. At some
Mhm.
point in time, Anthony Richardson needs to sit down, and he should have had this from day one and just be able to watch and learn because he has not played a lot of football. My concern is how much are you killing his confidence and the swagger by benching him. But you can kind of almost play this as, hey, we want to keep you safe, we want to keep you healthy. You know, you've got hurt last year and you missed a ton of games. So I think at the end of the day, if you want to win football games, you have to play Joe Flacco. It's just so difficult because I'm sure there's parts of this organization that are like, we took him at 4, we need to play him right away. You know, there's too many decision makers that don't think about just winning football games, right? Joe Flacco's going to win you the football games.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up the Browns because that's kind of what the Browns made the decision to not keep him, and then
Look
obviously
where they are.
Deshaun this season hasn't looked very great, and the Colts when they did put Joe Flacco, and it was against the good Steelers defense too, so he obviously is still able to win games for teams. So we'll see what the Colts do.
Right. He
Next,
made that Steelers defense look, I mean, mediocre, like
yeah,
they did not look like the team that we've seen all year. And
yeah,
it took a spectacular game from Justin Fields to even keep them in it. So,
hmm
yeah, didn't mean to cut you off there, but, it's just, it is surprising just to see, what Cleveland's done by getting rid of Flacco. And then if these guys decide to not play Flacco, what are we doing anymore?
yeah. It's like all of Cleveland's old quarterbacks are doing solid. So we'll see how they do the rest of the season. Next, we got the Dolphins taking on the Patriots, similar to the Dolphins-Titans game last week. This is probably a game not many people are going to be watching. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think it's an exactly similar game, right? Like good defense by New England, and that's kind of what kept Miami in check all game, and then just bad offense. And I think another week of Snoop Huntley will help Miami a lot, right? I think they'll be able to game plan a little bit more. I'm just really concerned with like Mike McDaniel right now. Like sometimes I'm like, what are you calling? Like every single run on 4th and 1 was try to use your speed to get to the sideline, which was not working at all, right? Like we saw A Chain every single run, and some of it I think is the backs too, right? Like A Chain every run was trying to bounce it to the outside, but then even you'd get Jalen Wright and he's going outside. You get Tyreek Hill on a sweep, right? And I know you got to try to feed these guys, but you heard the announcers talking about it, right? Like throw the ball to Tyreek Hill over the middle of the field. They did that at the end of the game. And I forget who it was. It might have been Dan Orlovsky or one of the other announcers, but they're like, wow, like I haven't been saying it all day, throw Tyreek Hill the ball over the middle of the field. So
Yeah,
I just think like Mike McDaniel kind of has his offensive play calling like confused and just I don't know. He's really struggling without Tua. Just on the other side, though, like the offense for the New England's not great. They're talking about benching Ramondre Stevenson because of fumbling issues. And obviously get that right. Like, Gerard Mayo said, like, how are we going to say, ball security is job security and then continue to play this guy if he's fumbling? But then on the flip side, right, is Antonio Gibson a starting running back in the NFL? Like, no, he's a solid backup and he's a good change of pace guy, but you're going to rely on him and Jacoby Brissett. Like, I do think this New England defense is good, but like I think you talked about this last week, right? Like Gerard Mayo just seems too chill and calm.
yeah,
At the end of the day, I just think like you have to look at like who has the better players in these bad games, and it is Miami, right? Like despite having maybe a worse quarterback, Brissett's probably better than Huntley. They have all the other better players across the board. It is a huge loss losing Jalen Phillips of the year. I think he tore his
yeah,
ACL, so that's a big loss. But they still have guys that'll be able to play at least somewhat of a good defense. I just think it comes and they didn't play bad defense last week, right? I mean, I know it's Will Levis, so it's kind of like how are you judging this game? And then Mason Rudolph, but I just think Miami has the better options. Another week of Snoop Huntley, they'll be better prepared, and hopefully they just watch back the game and see, throw the ball over the middle of the field to Tyreek Hill. He'll go make a play and he'll score a touchdown. So I'm going to go with Miami, but I mean, this is a crapshoot.
yeah. I think you can go either way for this one. So to go oppose you for, I think our first game where we'd be opposing each other, I'm going to go the Patriots here, just to kind of try to. I think the Patriots defense can slow down the Dolphins enough, and Jacoby Brissett can do just enough to get them the lead in this game. But like you said, the running back, whoever they start, that's going to be an interesting conversation going into it. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm going to go the Patriots. Next, we got the Browns taking on the Commanders. The Browns, they have not lived up to what people expected them to be this season. Obviously, Deshaun Watson hasn't either. I will say he's getting a little bit more slack than or getting a more hate than he should, because last week, obviously, they played all right, and their defense got them a defensive touchdown. And then at the end of the game, they had a 80-yard touchdown to Amari Cooper that got called back to. It was an iffy holding call. On the other side of the ball, you got the Commanders, who are the hottest team in football right now, most likely. I think that's where most people would call them. Jaden Daniels looks absolutely electric as a rookie quarterback. And Kingsbury has him in this perfect offense that's simple enough for him to understand and excel at an NFL level, obviously. And the running game also looks good as well. I mean, Austin Eckler was out and they still look good. McNichols ran, I don't remember how many yards he had, but he had that one touchdown where he just broke the left outside and just made it look easy. And I think the Commanders can keep that up against this Browns team who lost to a Raiders team that had no one last week. I mean, obviously I picked the Browns. I think you picked the Browns as well. Just because the Raiders were so hurt. Like, it was just like, how do you lose that game? And they ended up doing it. So I'm with the Commanders here. I think they stay hot.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Browns here too, right? Like, I think Deshaun is looking a little bit comfortable, but they're shooting themselves in the foot, right? Like the holding call that you talked about. But something that's like slept on a lot is the amount of drops that Amari Cooper has had this year.
Yeah.
I think he leads the NFL in drops. He had that drop on Sunday too that ended up being a pick the other way for Vegas. So, like when you're a team that is shooting yourself in the foot, we saw this with the Jets last week, right? Like you can never like expect them to be a consistent football team, right? Like we're just making stupid mistakes, and drops are like a huge indicator of a bad football team. Like Denver, the past couple of years has been a heavy drop team. Like Jacksonville leads the league in drops since I think 2019. And has Jacksonville done anything besides make, a wild card game? And Denver was bad the past couple of years. So like teams that drop the football, like you're not going to win, because, especially when they're leading to turnovers the other way. Yeah. And then when you just look at Washington, right? Like you said, they've been able to churn through whatever running backs they want. Surprisingly, their O-line's been a surprise. And just that's why the running game is surprising, right? They've been able to get that going behind what was viewed as a bad offensive line coming into the season. And Jaden Daniels, I mean, I've heard this from a ton of people, just listening to ESPN and all these different pundits. I mean, he has a case for MVP right now. 80% completion percentage. The only other guys to ever do that were Brady and Manning, and they won MVP, right? Like, who is playing better football right now than Jaden Daniels? Like, you could talk about, Darnold and Baker, and some of these guys are playing very, very well. But, like, the efficiency level, the large margins of victory, and this isn't a part of the MVP voting, but just the shock factor, right? Like how well he's playing in comparison to what people thought he would be. I don't see a way that Cleveland, with all of the issues that I just outlined, and that is just on the offense side of the ball. Maybe once they get Nick Chubb back, it's a little bit different, but just the way that Jaden Daniels is playing, you can't bet against him, right? It's like betting against, this is what we thought about betting against Josh Allen, right? Like when you have an MVP caliber quarterback right now, and it sounds insane to say like a rookie quarterback's playing like that, but you just can't bet against Jaden Daniels right now. So I'm going to go with Commanders.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Nothing more to add. So going into our next game, this is your team going into a divisional battle here. The Broncos obviously taking on the Raiders, and Bo Nix, negative yards going into the second half last week. Now he's coming into this one against the solid defense. What are your thoughts?
I'm not concerned about last week's game, right? Like last week's game, as I mentioned, like is a total wash. Like, yeah. he couldn't hold the ball. He was shot putting it half the time, right? Yeah. Like that's why they had all these screens. And hey, at the end of the day, once it cleared up, he started to throw darts, right? Like he got to 60 yards somehow, right? Like, it's not pretty, but we ran the ball really well. That's like part of it too. But that touchdown drive, you see the dart to Cortland Sutton over the middle of the field, and the touchdown was a little bit of a high ball. I don't know why the hell he threw it so high. Cortland Sutton was wide open, right? But he started to look comfortable there. And it's just, again, it's a wash of a game. It's wet as all hell. You cannot, think about the passing game in those moments. But on the flip side, right, like I'll talk about Denver all day, but, Vegas is without Devontae Adams. He's talking about, he wants to get traded. Maybe he has a hamstring injury. I don't know at this point if he actually does. And I saw a tweet today. It's kind of funny. Pat Surtain's locking everyone up to the point that your team's favorite wide receiver, requests a trade the week before they play the Denver Broncos. So, it's going to be really, really tough for Vegas because what are you working with, right? Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker. I think
Yeah.
Riley Moss, Jaquan, Macmillan, and Pat Surtain are good enough to lock up, not so good of good ball players. And I don't think this Raiders team is very good, right? We saw them beat Cleveland. Cleveland shoots themselves in the foot. Like they haven't beat anyone good in their wins. And I think not having Devontae, although I still think he would have gotten locked up by Surtain, I think it makes everyone else's life harder on that football team. I mean, and this is a football team that doesn't even know who they're going to play at quarterback, right? Like, I know they've been, rolling with Gardner and stuff like that, but 2 weeks ago we were just talking about, is Aiden O'Connell going to take over the job? So
Yeah.
that is an organization that has no clue what they're doing. Their head coach is liking posts about trading their star player. So there's clearly some, I don't even know. There's just chaos going on in that locker room and that organization, as there always is, right? Like that team is, like Dallas Cowboys light. When Al Davis was there, they were doing the same thing. It's just chaos. So I just think Denver, we finally saw them establish the run. Devontae and Jaleel had really good games last week. I think they're going to continue to try to do that. Bo not playing in the rain, playing in a normal game. We're back at home. I just think he's going to get comfortable. But the story of this isn't even the offense, right? Like the offense could play mediocre. And the way that this defense is playing, I don't know if the Raiders will score double digits points. Like locking down Aaron Rodgers, locking down Baker Mayfield. I think, even against the Steelers, right? The Steelers scored 13 points. The only week that we had anything kind of go wrong for us was week 1 against Seattle, and we still had 2 safeties in that game. So I think Denver, like I mentioned before, a top 3 defense. I'm willing to say that they're the best, but I have some respect for what Minnesota's doing right now. I just think that this team is going to lock down the Vegas Raiders with nothing going for them on offense. Like they just don't have any weapons without Devontae Adams. I mean, Brock Bowers is fine, but he might have a good day because we historically have struggled against the tight end a little bit. But I just think Denver's defense is too dominant, and the offense will play fine enough. I mean, I want to see how Bo continues to develop here. I think it's hard to tell, right? Because we saw him against Tampa, and he looked really, really good. And then we saw him last week, and it was that rain game, and it's just weird. But like I mentioned, right, that Cortland Sutton Bowl, that was a grown-up throw. He kind of stepped up, threw it in between a tight-ish window with 3 guys in the area against a good secondary. That's a good secondary over there. I know I said, they're not as good as we expected them to be, but it's still a good defense at the end of the day. So I'm going to go with the Broncos here just because, defense is good, offense is growing.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Broncos here as well. I mean, the Raiders, they had the one fluke win against the Ravens, and that was with Devontae Adams, so I'm not going to go in and act like they could pull that off again because I just think without Devontae, I don't think they have many pass catchers that can do much at all with the Broncos defense. And I think obviously Antonio Pierce, like you said, like that post, his head coaching style this season doesn't really seem like the culture over there is going well. And I think it comes with like Max Crosby. I forgot who else was really supportive of him going into the offseason last year, but it was like Max Crosby was like personally vouching for Antonio Pierce. If Antonio Pierce is gone, I'm gone, like things like that. And it hasn't played out well for them. So I think the Broncos win this one. Just their defense alone can probably win this for them.
Right, and your point about Devontae too against that Ravens, like he balled out that game. So like without him, again, do they win that game? Like probably not. But also the Antonio Pierce thing, like that's just the Raiders way, right? Like he is, that's what they are, right? They're fans, they're all assholes, like that's just the Raiders. Like I'm not even saying that as a Broncos fan, that is just like what they are, and that's what
they know.
Right, and that's what Crosby was saying. Like he believes in the Raider way. I mean, if that's what you want, right? Like I think they need a culture change, but hey, good for you, Max Crosby.
Anyways, going into the next game, we got the Cardinals taking on the 49ers. The Cardinals disappointed everyone last week. I mean, we were pretty high on them, and they just did not do well at all. And I think the Marvin Harrison Jr. and the Kyler Murray connection still looks solid. He had a touchdown last week. But other than that, they didn't really have anything click for them the whole entire game. Their defense, of course, did not look good. And it was against a relatively simple scheme. I mean, that's what we've been saying all year for the Commanders, but they've made it look good against everyone they play. On the other hand, the 49ers, Deebo Samuel came back and their offense looked like it was back to normal. Brandon Ayuk started getting a little bit more in rhythm, and George Kittle could be the best quarter or best tight end in football right now at the moment. I mean, he mossed 3 guys, and I think he's doing everything very consistently. When you look at other tight ends that were the best going into the year, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, obviously Dallas Goedert's doing pretty well, but he did have a drop last week. Yeah, or saying him. Sorry, you like
Sam
cut out.
Laporta, Kyle
Yeah, Sam
Pitts.
Laporta obviously hasn't done much at all this year. So it's been a little bit of a weird season for tight ends, but I think George Kittle is proving that he's been the most consistent throughout the last few seasons. So I think the 49ers come into this game, and I just think at a home environment, I think they're going to either blow out the Cardinals or at least have a solid win. So I'm going to do the 49ers here.
Arizona's just so disappointing, man. I had such high hopes for them. I had them in my top 5. Like every week they start off good. Like last week, I thought that we're gonna have a shootout, right? Like they started off hot and they looked really good. I just don't know what's going on over there. I mean, like the Marv Kyler connection looks good, right? But then outside of that, like you mentioned, like what else have they got going? Like Michael Wilson looked good 2 weeks ago, and then last week it looked like him and Kyler Murray didn't even know who each other were, right? Like they just weren't on the same page. And like that's a guy you need him or Greg Dortch or someone to step up. And I think they're capable players, but it's just they're all not on the same page. And this organization just they don't seem like chaotic. They just seem like they're grasping for air and they're not able to just compete in football games. And San Fran is too good. You mentioned Debo comes back and their offense looks more clean and back to what it used to be. It's still a little bit different without McCaffrey, but Mason's looked pretty good so far this season. My biggest gripe with them is just like Ayuk's got to figure it out, man. Like at some point in time, he's got to figure it out because you can't be relying on Jawan Jennings to keep having, good football games. I think he's a decent player, right? And like, he had a good game last week, despite Debo coming back. But, eventually someone's going to say, let's double team George Kittle. And he might moss them like he did. And they're going to say, let Ayuk go, right? Like he's not, he's not getting open. He's not catching passes. Like he had that 1 week where he's just dropping touchdowns, and Peyton Manning's getting pissed off on the Manning cast. So it's just like at some point he's got to figure it out. And this is just like a lesson learned, I guess, on like all these holdouts, right? Like you're going to start really, really slow because you're just not accustomed to playing football, especially without all the preseason games. Like that already slows the process down of like getting into the season. But we are seeing guys like into the flow of things now. That's week 5. And, the normal preseason schedule would be over. We'd be a couple weeks in the schedule. It's just Ayuk, man. I don't know. It's hard. And he makes me not want to take the 49ers because I'm like, how is your star receiver so bad right now? But at the end of the day, like you got to look at who they're playing and how everyone around him is playing, and they're playing well enough. So I'm going to go with the 49ers.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. The offense should be good enough to beat the Cardinals in this one. Next, we got the Packers taking on the Rams. The Packers obviously did not start well. They finished well against the Vikings, but it wasn't enough to get the win. The Rams lost to the Bears, and the whole game just was like very meh for both sides. It wasn't like a great game for either team. It wasn't a terrible game for either team either, but it was just kind of a little bit of a mid game. So what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I think the Rams coming in, they're playing a worse defense than they had last week. So I think things roll a little bit more on offense for them. And we still saw Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington like play pretty well. But I think, just what we've seen from Green Bay, like Green Bay, I know Minnesota is a good team, right? But 35 points, like that's a lot of points, right? Like I don't care who you're playing, when you're letting up that many points, like your defense can't be that good, right? So at the end of the day, like I think things are just a lot easier for the Rams. And the team just keeps surprising us, right? Despite all these injuries. And then we look at the flip side, and I think this is the bigger part of the story, is Green Bay with and without Jordan Love. 2 weeks with Jordan Love. Granted, they played good football teams. He has struggled. Like the interceptions, like I know they came back late, and the game against Philly was kind of close, but it's just like he hasn't looked totally comfortable, and he can't be totally comfortable right now with this injury. They played better football with Malik Willis. Like that's straight up, like whether it was the game when they just ran the ball all over the Tennessee Titans, or the game that they threw the ball with Malik Willis, decent amount, they won both of those games, by like a decent margin. We just haven't seen that with Jordan Love, and losing, Christian Watson kind of hurts. I know we saw Dontavian Wicks play pretty well. I just don't think we can trust Green Bay to play well enough right now. The Rams defense is pretty good. I think, Braden Fisk and Jared Verse can cause some problems for them. but it's just like what team can you trust, right? We've seen the Rams play well against teams that they shouldn't play well with the amount of injuries they had. I understand the last week's game, right? But Chicago's a top 5 defense in the NFL right now. We can't say the same about Green Bay, and they were in that game, right? Like at the end of the day, they were in that game. They didn't lose by a ton. They played pretty well. I just think Green Bay, you can't trust them. So I'm going to go with the Rams just because I don't know what we're going to get out of Jordan Love.
Wow. Okay. I like a little bit of diversity here. I'm going to go the Packers. I think obviously they do lose Christian Watson. On the other hand, you got Dontavion Wicks coming in. I think Jaden Reed's been doing well, and Romeo Doubs is like their solid guy. Like you can always rely on him for a catch whenever you need to. And I think that Jordan Love, yes, he struggled. Obviously, I think it's just like a little bit of the injury kind of bothering him, getting his feet under him, all that. And he did wear a Favre jersey going into the game, so it was expected a little bit. But anyways, I just think the Vikings defense did its job, and they've done it to most quarterbacks they played this year. Is confused them, got them to make some mistakes. So we'll see if the Packers are able to bounce back. I'm going to pick them for this one. I think the Rams, they're solid. I think they're kind of just doing average in all of their games. They're not doing anything insane, and they beat the 49ers. So they did do that. Like you said, that you just don't know what Rams team you're going to get every week, but I'm going to go the Packers here in this one. Next, we got the Giants taking on the Seahawks, and the Giants, obviously, I think they should have beat the Cowboys in that game with everything that considering what they could have done. They obviously decided not to go for a touchdown, kick the field goal, things like that, and it probably lost them the game, in my opinion. And on the other side of the ball, you got the Seahawks, who going into last week, everyone was like, they're one of the better NFC teams. They're better than everyone other than the Vikings. And they go in against the Lions. Their defense gets lit up. Their defense just lets up touchdowns everywhere. Jared Goff goes a perfect 18 for 18, has a receiving touchdown, things like that. The Lions were having like very creative play calls, things like that to confuse the defense. So it makes a little bit of sense. Their defense obviously did not have a good game, but their offense, the running game looked amazing. And it was a little bit of a surprise because their O-line obviously hasn't been anything amazing, but their Kenneth Walker coming back really electrified that offense in the running game. He had 3 touchdowns, lost me a fantasy matchup, won me a different fantasy matchup. So it was like, what am I feeling? But it was a frustrating loss with him. I was up like 33, 34, and he came in and just lit it up and ended up beating me. So that kind of sucked. But I think the Seahawks win this game pretty easily. I don't believe in what the Giants are doing. Obviously, Malik Neighbors is doing really well for them, so I'm not going to hate on that. But Daniel Jones is not the quarterback for them to win these kind of games, so I'm going to the Seahawks.
Yeah, I think the tough part too with the Giants is right. Like Neighbors might not even play. He got banged up at the end of the game, and Wan'Dale got banged up too. So, I think Neighbors has a concussion. So, that's tough. Not going in there with possibly your best player being out. And Wan'Dale already being banged up. I think Wan'Dale's going to play, but he was almost feasting off of more attention towards Neighbors. He's still going to get a ton of targets, but they're going to focus more on him. And the concerning part, above all, right, like the passing game, Daniel Jones isn't great, but they were able to do good things with Neighbors and Wan'Dale. They couldn't run the ball against a team that got dominated the week before. Devin Singletary had like 18 carries for 24 yards. If you gave I think Derrick Henry had 18 carries for 140 yards against Dallas. So that is like super concerning. And that was what everyone was coming into the week. Devin Singletary is going to run all over this Dallas defense. Yeah. And then he did exactly the opposite. And that is super duper concerning. I know Seattle's defense got lit up last week, but I think that they're a lot better than that. And it's tough. Detroit, they're one of the better teams in the NFC. We said at some point in time they were going to bounce back, right? They beat Arizona, and then they looked insane last week. Like the offense, creative, perfect game. Just because Jared Goff 18 for 18, right? But then beyond that, the way that they were able to run the football, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, that's been consistent for them. But they continue to do that with a perfect passing game. I think it's just tough, right? That was like Seattle hitting like a buzzsaw. I think the way that they bounced back is super important, right? And I think Troy Aikman kind of talked about this. They started slow, and it looked like this game was going to be a blowout. They made that a competitive game and had a chance to win the football game. With that weird safety going on with Jared Goff, like kind of trying to take a shot and then he, doesn't get the ball all the way out. They gave themselves a shot to win that football game. And so I think like this team is still 3-1, right? They're still one of the better teams in the NFC. And I just think that they're going to be way too tough of a matchup for the Giants, right? Like the Giants, with or without Neighbors, aren't going to be able to play, in a back and forth offensive game like Seattle had last week, right? So and you talked about this, the way that Kenneth Walker looked, like if Kenneth Walker can continue to play like that, not only in the run game, in the pass game, he was a big weapon. He caught that ball and he like had that weird contortion where he was like able to have all that body control, get back up, get moving. They were checking down to him. Just the way that this offense is too, it's like looked very creative. I saw, JSN's route tree just last year with Waldron versus this year. And then on the inverse, I saw TJ Moore's without it. But regardless, right, we're talking Seattle here. JSN, he's looked really, really good, right? Like DK Metcalf doesn't fumble that ball in that game. Maybe they're in it. Maybe it's a lot closer of a ball game. So, it's just it's going to be really, really tough for the Giants without Neighbors. If they have Neighbors, maybe they lose by 14. Without Neighbors, I don't see a way that this team can score a lot of points. So I'm going to go with Seattle here.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think it'll be a pretty rough one for the Giants here. Next, you got Sunday Night Football, the Cowboys taking on the Steelers. And this is a big game for both teams. The Steelers looking to keep their pretty good record alive, and the Cowboys looking to establish a little bit of momentum going into week 6. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, huge game for both of these teams. And unfortunately for Dallas, it looks like they're going to be without Micah Parsons, which is, huge, right? Like that really like kills what they have going on defense. I know they were able to stop Devin Singletary last week, and their run defense looked a little better, but Devin Singletary is not, a top back. And I know that, Pittsburgh also doesn't have a top back, but they do have Justin Fields, right? So how are you going to contain him without Micah, without being able to stop the run game? This brings another layer of the run game where it's the quarterback run, so I just think, and you look at the way Justin Fields played last week in a loss, that I don't think is necessarily on him. I think it's more on the defense, not being able to keep Joe Flacco, corralled. He played lights out. He had 3 touchdowns. I think he had 300 yards. Like this was like what people expected from Justin Fields when he got drafted out of Ohio State. You saw that Clemson game, right? And he looked lights out. He's throwing the ball over the field. That is exactly what we expected. And I think he is the true X factor in this game, right? Like the Dallas defense without Parsons, they don't really have much going on over there. Trayvon Diggs, I think he got a little banged up in that game too. And they got torched by Neighbors and Wandale. So I just think that offense is good enough to, have a day against Dallas. And then on the flip side, Pittsburgh's defense is not going to play this bad every week. They're going to get pressure on Dak. Again, this is another football team. Dallas can't stop the run. They also can't run the ball, right? And that's going to hurt them. So I just think, Dallas, despite having some good ball players in Dak and CD, I don't think they're going to be able to get going against Pittsburgh's defense. I think Justin Fields, I think he has a day, honestly. I don't think Dallas is a good enough defense, and I think he can put up a similar game as he did last week.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you here. I wanted you to take the Cowboys here, but I'm going to go Steelers as well. I just think that it's going to be similar to the Ravens game. I think that's kind of the perfect example of a game plan for this team to run against the Cowboys, especially without Micah Parsons. Like you got a mobile quarterback and a solid running. You have 3 running backs that are capable of running the ball. So you can rely on running the ball and still throw the ball at a decent rate. Pickens last week obviously had the fumble, but he had a good game other than that. And if that didn't happen, maybe they beat the Colts in that game. So I think the Steelers can beat the Cowboys in this one. And if they do, I just think the Cowboys are in for a rough season. If the Steelers can beat them and in a handily fashion, I think the Cowboys would be just really distraught. And maybe if they lose this one, they go, hey, we need another pass catcher. We need something else. And they go get Devontae Adams. Who knows? Yeah. Next, we got Monday Night Football. My Saints taking on the Chiefs. Obviously, the Saints did not have what you wanted last week. I think it all started with Rashid Shaheed trying to catch a punt backwards at the 1-yard line. Like he's an all-pro returner. I knew not to do that when I was a freshman kick returner in freshman football. Like in high school, you don't field the ball like that on a punt or anything. Like you don't do that. It's going to be a touchback. Let it go. If it bounces at the 1 and bounces backwards, it's you give props to the punter and you move on. You don't catch it backwards at any point in a punt return. Then you should never do that. So it was 2 no-nos and one play, drops it into the end zone. The Falcons get 7 free points. Then the Saints go on offense. Derek Carr throws a sidearm pass that was not really open on the screen either. He should have dirted it, throws it, bounces 20 feet in the other direction. Falcons take a pick 6. Outside of that, the Saints defense does their job and only allows 12 points. And so the Saints go into that, score 24 points. That should be an easy win. Like if you don't shoot yourself in the foot multiple times in a game, you win easily. And it was with a banged up team without 2 linemen. And going into that game, if you told me that we did everything right like we did and led the game in every single statistic, except for obviously the punt muff and that pick 6, they should have won that game easily. So it was a frustrating loss. The Chiefs on the other side lost Rashee Rice for this game, at least. He's not necessarily out for the season. We don't know what's going on with that yet. Patrick Mahomes does not look like himself. He's thrown a lot of picks this year. I think he's up to like 6 or 7 or 8. And that offense is not humming like it usually does. And maybe that's because Isaiah Pacheco's down, but they did add Kareem Hunt, who looked like he still had a little bit of a tread on the tires. He looked like he was doing all right. And Travis Kelce obviously was the leading receiver for the first time this season. And he looks like he's getting a little bit of his feet back under him. And I think against the Saints, the Saints cannot guard tight ends. We saw it against the Eagles with Dallas Goedert, the one guy you have to guard, the one guy, and they let him go for a 60, 70-yard play on 3rd and 16. So maybe Travis Kelce is a really big game this week. But I'm going with the Saints here. I just think, obviously, the Chiefs are banged up. I don't see the Chiefs having enough offensive power. But with the way the Saints have beaten themselves the last 2 weeks, maybe they do. I just think the Saints will bounce back and should beat the Chiefs in this week, even though no one expects it. What are your thoughts on this one, Ty?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think the big thing is no Rashee Rice, no Isaiah Pacheco. I know Andy Reid is talking, we're going to spread it around, but let's look at who we're spreading the ball around to. Justin Watson, I don't think is a good football player. Juju Smith-Schuster is well past his prime. I know Kareem Hunt looked pretty good last week. He looked like he had a little bit something going, but a guy that they thought they were going to be able to rely on, Carson Steele, fumbles and then they bench him. I know they might get Clyde back this week, and they're really, really going to have to rely on their run game. Like I know you said, like Travis Kelce could be a world beater for them just based on who they're playing on defense, but I think like the way Mahomes, like sometimes I'm just like, what are you doing, man? Like that pick was terrible, and they should have washed that Chargers team, right? Like that Chargers team is Justin Herbert's barely can move because he's got a messed up ankle, and then they have both of their tackles out. No Slater, no Joel. So like, what are you doing? How are you in this close of a ball game? I know it's an interdivision game, but like they just 2 turnovers. Right, Steele gets benched. Right, fine. Kareem Hunt might not fumble, but Mahomes is still out there, and I know he's our best quarterback in the league, and blah 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 blah. But right now it's just looking lost sometimes, and he doesn't have the weapons out wide to kind of help him out. When you have Rashee Rice and you have Hollywood Brown, that's fine. But they're really going to have to. Xavier Worthy's really going to have to step up. And he was looked at as a boomer bust guy for them this year, right? Like he'll be open on the deep balls, but they're going to have to look at him consistently. So he's going to have to really get consistently open too, with the number 1 corner on him a lot. So it's really going to be tough. I know, Marshawn Lattimore is a really good corner, and he'll be shadowing him, I'm sure. I know Worthy's faster than him, but it's still, that it doesn't always just come down to pure speed in the cornerback receiver, matchups. I think Kelce will have a game, because we did see him bounce back finally. They kind of have to use him, right? Like they don't really have a choice. Just on the flip side, though, like I don't think New Orleans is going to make those boneheaded mistakes. Derek Carr might throw picks, right? Like that's going to happen. He's been an efficient quarterback, but he's never been a totally turnover-free quarterback. Shaheed's not going to do dumb stuff like that again. So I think like when you just compare, last week's games, you're not going to see that same Saints team. You can't say that you're not going to see that same Chiefs team because they don't have 2 of their best players. And then when you just compare like opponents too, right? Like both these teams played the Falcons pretty close. So I think at the end of the day, like it could be a close game. I don't think one team will blow, the other one out of the water at this point in time with the way that the Chiefs team is and just the way that the Saints are still kind of trying to find their way. But I'm actually going to go with the Saints here because I don't think that at the end of the day that Kansas City has enough on offense to, match this defense. And I think the Saints have enough on offense. I know the Chiefs have good defense, but I believe in Kamara. I believe in what Clint Kubiak's doing. They've looked good on offense. And right, like you said, it should have been 24-12 last week, but take away those turnovers, right? Like the defense letting up 12 points. I mean, super impressive. And KC, how many points did they score last week? 17 against the Chargers. Not a good football team. Like, at least in the current state without some of their better offensive linemen and all these other guys that they're missing. So I think it's a close one. It's Monday Night Football. It'll be a really good game. But I'm going to go with the Saints.
Yeah, I like it. And I mean, Kamara and Clint Kubiak, obviously Taysom Hill. There was a chart that came out. They've only scored 3 touchdowns without Taysom Hill this season. And when he's in, their offense looks amazing. When he's out, like it just does not look like it's going right. So if Clint Kubiak can scheme this game up, I think Taysom Hill will be out this week. I'm not sure because the injury report hasn't came out yet. But if he's out, if they're able to scheme up Alvin Kamara, well, he's the number 1 fantasy player in all formats. So if they can scheme him up right, I think Alvin Kamara have a game, and hopefully the Saints will win. So that'll do it for our weekly picks. Teams on bye are the Lions, Chargers, Eagles, and Titans. So we're missing a little bit of action with the Lions being out, but all the other 3 teams, you're not really missing too much. And they're all trying to get, or the Chargers and Eagles are both trying to get healthy. So luckily they got a good bye at a good time. That'll do it. I think so. Quick announcement for the podcast. This will be the last week, maybe next week, possibly will be the last week. Will be the Jinx and Hammer podcast, and I'll figure out what I want to name it, and we'll switch it before next episode. So could be the possibly the final episode of the Jinx and Hammer podcast. So I appreciate you, Ty, coming on. Well, Ty will keep coming back no matter what. We love having him on. So I look forward to that. Ty, you got any closing thoughts for the week?
Yeah, I think, overreaction. Let's not jump off the Bills bandwagon too fast. I think they're still, probably the best team in football and the best team in the AFC. So I'm excited to see them go up against the Texans. And I think this is the big bounce back week for them. And, excited to see Bo Nix continue to grow.
Yeah. So that'll do it. Let us know down below what you think about the picks. If you guys disagree, comment down below. We love hearing any thoughts, and I'll respond for sure. So like and comment and subscribe. Remember to follow us on everything, social media, Jenks Hammer Pod. It'll be changing next week. I'll announce it. And then check out our podcast on wherever you get your podcasts. It's available everywhere. So we'll see you guys next week.